What exactly is creativity? In this video, we're going to dive in and try to define this elusive muse. Let's look at this example. An unsuspecting mouse dives for cheese only to crash through the painting facade and land on a hot stove. He jumps onto a cube of ice to cool off while ascending a tiny escalator. He drops off at the top, lands on a boxing glove only to bounce off, naturally, landing on a mouse-sized basket, thereby setting off a miniature rocket which sends him to the moon. The approach to catching mice as pictured here is designated the best mousetrap by Rube Goldberg and could be described as clever, complicated, absurd, but is it creative? Creativity is an elusive muse, difficult to define and even harder to capture. Google has over 1.8 billion pages on creativity. Amazon has greater than 100,000 books on the topic. And perhaps creativity is a bit like United States Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said in 1964 Pornography, "I know it when I see it." What exactly, though, is so mythical about creativity? The modern-day notion of creativity can be traced back to the European Renaissance, coincident with an emerging appreciation for the abilities of man, not God, to make new things. A period which brought about the quintessential creative Leonardo da Vinci. In the time since post-Renaissance or early Enlightenment, thinkers, philosophers, and eventually psychologists have pondered, what is it about creative people that make them creative? What did Da Vinci have or do differently from everyone else? Parts of this mythology could be explained by our inability to find that creativity gene. If no physical location on the human genome encodes for creativity, then where is it? What is it? The mythology of creativity remains. Complicating matters a little further, creativity is hard to define. A generally agreed upon definition for creativity involves the production of novel and useful products. Including novelty and usefulness is what made the remote associations test, or RAT test, an effective measure of creativity. Look at this example of a word that can be added to cottage, Swiss, cake. Cheese is the novel and useful word that links them. However, several other novel, but perhaps not as useful words could be envisioned. Take the absurd example of in the woods. Cottage in the woods, that works. Swiss in the woods, okay, maybe. Cake in the woods, not exactly. While novel could be argued for this example, usefulness rapidly declines by the time we consider cake. Determining if a creative product is novel is easier than ever before in history. Digital storage and searchability of the internet allows humanity to catalog nearly all creative endeavors, ranging from new products, literature, art, and beyond. See, determining if a created product is useful is inherently subjective, which is why the ambiguity and uncertainty surrounding creativity. We can all agree that Goldberg's mousetrap is novel, and unlike any mousetrap we've ever seen before. However, we could also agree that the mousetrap is decidedly unuseful in practice, and sadly would not fulfill the criteria of creativity. Innovation, on the other hand, is often sloppily used as a synonym for creativity, but describes a distinctly different idea. In contrast to creativity, innovation is easier to define and typically describes making changes in something established, especially by introducing new methods, ideas, or products. Implementation is a key element of innovation. Again, consider the mousetrap. An innovative mousetrap would be one that brings about a change to something established, like the simple spring trap, by introducing and developing a better mousetrap. In fact, the phrase "build a better mousetrap" is a metaphor for modern innovation. Allegedly, the US Patent and Trade Office has over 4,000 patents for innovative mousetraps, making it one of the most frequently reinvented devices in US history. But be forewarned, making a better mousetrap can be a dark journey into the minds of innovators. Josh Wolfe, co-founder and managing partner at the venture firm Lux Capital, recently described the directional trend in technology as an undeniable arrow of progress.
And if you study the history of venture capital, which is widely known, every 10 or 15 years there was some secular wave in technology, and a handful of firms dominated that wave. And when we started Lux, we said, let's go where other people were not looking. And nobody at the time, when they were chasing optical networking and dot-coms and coming off of the bust, was looking at chemistry and physics and material science and the hard sciences. And so we got really obsessed with that, and particularly the intersection of those. And it was happening at venues and academic centers of excellence with Nobel Prize winners that were in geographies that were not proximate to venture clusters.
Setting examples ranging from light, flame, filament, LED, to computation, mechanical, to solid-state semiconductors. Innovative applications of new technology continue to build off each other and never go backwards. When considering innovation, Wolfe goes on to say, a simple question to ask is, what sucks? Identifying the pain points of any given product is a sure way to begin innovating, to begin making changes to an established thing. Echoing this idea, Adam Grant, the famous organizational psychologist at the Wharton Business School and New York Times bestselling author, described in his book Originals that while deja vu is a sensation you feel when you're in a new place that you've been before, vu jade is the opposite feeling, when you're in a situation that is very familiar and suddenly you feel as if you're experiencing it completely new. This new, fresh perspective on a place or problem, this flash or eureka moment, provides insight and new perspective. Vu jade is especially important for innovators, says Tom Kelly of the innovation firm IDEO, to be able to look at familiar situations and see them anew. Because fresh perspective helps them become aware of opportunities and possibilities that no one else is noticing. How then can we envision the relationship between creativity and innovation? Each has unique aspects of process and outcome. An unexhaustive list of creative processes includes activities such as incubation, divergent and convergent thinking, creative cognitive approaches, explicit implicit interactions, conceptual blending, honing, counterfactual thinking, and so on and so on. The overall creative outcome, again, is something new and useful. In contrast, the innovative process introduces new methods, ideas, or products with the overall innovative outcome becoming a change to something established. It seems that creativity generates something new from nothing, taking a myriad of approaches to get there, whereas innovation generates something new from something established, taking iterative approaches to do so. Studies on the biological basis of creativity support the idea that creativity creates new ideas that didn't exist previously. Recent developments in brain imaging allow neuroscientists to monitor the operation of a brain during creative behavior. Asking participants to complete creative tasks, such as that remote associations test I told you about before, while imaged in a functional MRI scanner. So what does this all mean? Well, the creative brain is wired differently. People who are creative can simultaneously engage brain networks that typically don't work together. While several regions of the brain are involved in creative thought, there are 3 subnetworks that are interconnected between some brain regions that are thought to be key players in creative thought. Specifically, the default mode network, the salience network, and the executive control network. Now, this is all really new and cutting edge, but it's thought that the default mode network is involved in memory and mental stimulation, and could play an important role in processes like mind wandering, like that right there, imagination and spontaneous thinking. Perhaps this could fulfill the new requirement of creativity. The salience network detects important information, both in the environment and internally. It could be responsible for sorting the ideas that emerge from the default mode. Conversely, this could also fulfill the useful requirement of creativity. Lastly, the executive control network helps people focus on individual ideas while discarding those that aren't working, perhaps providing resilience to keep at it. After all, creativity is hard. The synchrony between these systems seems to be important for creativity. People who think more flexibly and come up with more creative ideas are better able to engage these networks. They typically don't work together, but creatives can bring these systems online. One thing that is emerging is that this myth of the left brain and right brain in creative thinking is really going away. It's really a whole brain endeavor. In Genius, The Life and Science of Richard Feynman, a biography of one of the most dazzling and flamboyant scientists of the 20th century, James Glick recounts a story Richard's father told that illustrated the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing the thing itself.
But it was the opposite. My father had taught me, looking at a bird, he says, you know what that bird is? It's a brown-throated thrush. But in Portuguese, it's a hontorapeiro. In Italian, a chuterapiquita. He says in Chinese, it's a chongmongpao. In Japanese, a patata tokorecha, etc. He says, now you know all the languages you want to know what the name of that bird is. And when you're finished with all that, he says, you'll know absolutely nothing whatever about the bird. You only know about humans in different places and what they call the bird. Now, he says, let's look at the bird and what it's doing. He knew the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something, which I learned very, very early.
So what then is the utility in defining creativity and giving it a name? Well, by defining the outcome of creativity as something new and useful. The framework is set to explore processes of creativity and the elements that contribute to generating creative ideas. Now, with this fresh perspective, we again consider Rube Goldberg's mousetrap. After completing an engineering degree at UC Berkeley, Goldberg lasted only 6 months as a San Francisco City engineer before leaving his job to devote himself entirely to cartoon sketching. In the context of a cartoonist, his art and style were both new. Nothing was similar at the time. And useful. He was and remains a very famous American cartoonist. And his creativity inspired generations of engineers, inventors, artists, and musicians for years to come. So then, what do you think? Is it creative?